They called her a criminal, but she was just a girl with a soft soul, crossing the border with blistered feet and a heart made of paper. No name, no shoes, no plan except to survive. She came from a place where the wind carried gunshots, and even the silence knew how to scream. Her name wasn't on any list, not on any chart, not even on her own birth record. Just a whisper in her grandmother's prayer, and a secret between her and God. They say she was 19, but I think part of her soul had already lived 100 years. You could see it in her eyes, the way they never stayed still, like she was always listening for something coming. She didn't talk much, didn't cry either, but when she walked like every step was borrowed. She crossed into this country the way most folks pray, desperate, hollow, and still, somehow full of hope. Inside her belly, she carried more than hunger. She carried a child, a secret one, wrapped in fear and love. And when she reached that church, a place with peeling paint and a broken bell, she stood at the door for a long time, not knocking, just standing, like she was waiting for a sign. Then she took off her sweatshirt, wrapped it around the tiny bundle, and placed it gently on the cold stone step. A boy, silent, breathing, wrapped in the smell of milk and sweat and prayers. She kissed his forehead, crossed herself the way her mother once did, and disappeared into the morning dust. They called her a monster, but I believe heaven cried that day. If you've ever felt forgotten or blamed just for trying to survive, stay here with me. This story wasn't born to be pretty, it was born to be told. She walked for hours after that, down alleys filled with broken glass, past trucks that didn't stop, past men that stared too long, and women who looked away too quickly. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes stayed open, like someone who knew the world could change in a second, and never for the better. She had nothing on her. No ID, no phone, just a rosary tied around her ankle and a blood stain on her jeans. But the world don't wait for stories. It only sees what it wants to see, and what they saw that morning was a girl with brown skin moving too fast through a white neighborhood. She heard the sirens before she saw the lights. 1, then 2, then 3. Red and blue, cutting through the sunrise like wounds across the sky. They surrounded her like she was dangerous, like she had power, like she wasn't just tired and hungry and hollowed out by fear. "Hands where I can see 'em," one yelled. She did. "Do you speak English?" She didn't answer. She'd learned by now. Words could be used against you. They cuffed her before she could say a word, and when they opened the van door, she saw something she never expected. A woman, watching, from behind her curtain, with eyes wide and full of something like guilt. She recognized that look. It was the look people wear when they know they should have done something, but didn't. They took her to the station, didn't ask about the baby, didn't ask about her name, just fingerprinted her, marked her as illegal, filed her under threat, and locked her in a cell that smelled like bleach and old rage. But it was in that cell, when the lights finally went out, that she whispered something for the first time since crossing the border. A name, soft, sacred, almost like a song. But that name wasn't hers, and the guard who heard it started to ask questions. The guard leaned closer. He wasn't cruel like the others, didn't bark orders, didn't smile too long, just stood there like a man who knew better than to ask too many questions. But when she whispered that name, he froze. Aaron. That's what she said, barely a breath, almost like it hurt to say. The guard blinked. "Aaron who?" he asked. She said nothing. He scribbled something on a yellow pad, but didn't press her again. She curled up on that iron bench, arms around her stomach out of habit, like she'd forgotten the baby was no longer there. And when she closed her eyes, the cell grew colder, like even the walls were holding their breath. Outside, the system got to work. They fed her number into a machine, matched her fingerprints to nothing, marked her as unidentified foreign female, and labeled her a flight risk. She wasn't running, she was remembering. The night she gave birth was quiet. No doctor, no bed, just the cracked floor of a storage shed in El Paso. and the sound of a church bell somewhere far off. The baby didn't cry. He just looked at her, as if he'd already forgiven her for what she was about to do. She held him against her chest, wrapped him in a t-shirt that wasn't hers, the only piece of warmth she could steal from this new country. Then she walked. 3 miles. No shoes. Every step tearing open something inside her. And when she left him on that church doorstep, she didn't look back. But now, in that cage of concrete and cold steel, his name slipped from her mouth like a prayer unfinished. And the guard, he felt it too, because sometimes a name is all a child has in this world. And sometimes it's the only thing a mother has left to give. But what he did next wasn't in the manual. The guard waited till the cameras blinked off. Midnight, when the jail turned into a graveyard of forgotten names. He walked back to her cell, slow, unsure, and slipped something through the bars. A folded paper, stained with sweat, smelled like engine grease and burnt coffee. She stared at it, didn't touch it at first, didn't trust it, but then she opened it and froze. Inside was a photocopy of a note, a crumpled thing, written in Spanish in her handwriting. She remembered it. She'd placed it under the baby's body just beneath the t-shirt, written with a pencil borrowed at a shelter, before they pushed her back into the night. Mi hijo se llama Aaron. Por favor, cuídenlo. No tengo elección, pero Dios sí. My son's name is Aaron. Please care for him. I have no choice, but God does. She hadn't told anyone. No one knew about the note, not even the nun who found him. But now, here it was, in the hands of a prison guard, passed to her like a secret between ghosts. She looked up at him, tried to speak, but the words got stuck somewhere behind her ribs. He nodded once. "There's a hearing tomorrow," he said. "Judge Peterson, she doesn't like your kind." He didn't say more, didn't need to, because when he turned to walk away, he whispered something. Don't give her the silence she wants. But silence was all she had left. That night, she pressed the copy of the note against her chest, and for the first time since she crossed the border, she cried. Not loud, not messy, just a slow river down her cheeks, like her body finally remembered what sorrow was meant to feel like. And in another room, the judge had just read something she shouldn't have. The courtroom smelled like old books, and something else, something dry, sterile, like a place that had forgotten how to feel. She sat in the defendant's chair, hands still cuffed, wrists red where the metal rubbed too long. No translator, no family, just the hum of an old fan turning slow, like even the air didn't want to be there. Then the door opened, and she walked in. Judge Peterson, hair the color of smoke, eyes cold as polished stone, a mouth that only curved when it hurt someone. She didn't look at the girl, didn't ask her name, just flipped through a folder, thick with assumptions. Illegal entry, suspected child abandonment, evasion of custody. Her voice had no tremor, just edges. She paused, adjusted her glasses, then looked up, finally, right into the girl's eyes. And she smiled, the kind of smile you don't teach in law school, the kind born from years of deciding who mattered and who didn't. I've seen your kind before, the judge said, voice echoing in the wooden room. Running from your messes, hiding behind babies and broken stories, always silent when it counts. Always crying when it's too late. The girl didn't respond. She couldn't. Her English was broken, but not as broken as the system that brought her here. Still, the silence filled the room like smoke, so thick you could almost choke on it. The judge slammed the gavel once, a crack of finality, and then she said it, the words that burned like acid on soft skin. You are a threat to this country. And just like that, she was no longer a girl, no longer a mother, not even human in that room. Just a threat, a file number, a border stain. The guard in the corner clenched his jaw, but said nothing. The public defender sat beside her, tapping his pen against a coffee cup. Didn't look at her once. They handed down the decision like a routine. No bail, detention until further notice, deportation pending. The room emptied. The gavel still echoed inside her bones. She didn't cry this time. She just lowered her head and whispered a word no one could hear, except me. Because some prayers aren't meant for ears. They're meant for the walls, for the heavens, for the dead who still listen. But someone was listening, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. And what she saw changed everything. In the back of that courtroom, past the last pew, stood a woman in a grey cardigan holding a clipboard too tight. Her name was Michelle, assistant caseworker, 3 years into the job. Still called the intern by the ones who never bothered to learn her name. She wasn't supposed to be there, not officially, not for that case, but she stayed, ever since that baby showed up on the steps of St. Helena's, wrapped in a shirt that smelled like cumin and sorrow. She hadn't been able to sleep. She kept hearing a whisper in her head. Aaron, not just a name, a pull, like the echo of something unfinished. When she saw the girl in court, something inside her cracked open, the way her shoulders didn't move when she was insulted, the way her wrists stayed still, even when cuffed, the way she didn't flinch at the word threat. Michelle knew that kind of silence, the kind women wear when they've run out of space to scream. She flipped through her folder, found the intake form from the baby's discovery. There, barely legible, was the note. Mi hijo se llama Aaron. Michelle's breath caught. That same name, same handwriting as the note the jail copied. Same scent of fear soaked into every word. She looked up, back at the girl, who was now being pulled to her feet, chained at the waist, and in that moment, Michelle felt shame. Real shame. Not the kind you get from forgetting to reply to an email, but the kind that sits deep in your chest and whispers, "You should have spoken." She watched the courtroom empty, watched the judge scribble her signature like she was signing off a grocery list, and Michelle did nothing. Just stood there, fingers numb, heart louder than the silence around her. She wanted to move, wanted to say, "That's the mother, that's his mother." But fear sat on her tongue like lead. She left the courthouse, rode the elevator down, the clipboard still in her hand. And when she got to the parking lot, she saw something that made her stop cold. A paper, under her windshield wiper, folded, stained, and on it, a copy of the same note. But this one had something extra written at the bottom, in ink that wasn't hers. "You still have time to do the right thing." They took her back to detention like a body being moved, not a person. No one looked her in the eye. No one asked if she was cold. And she was. Not just from the air conditioning that never shut off inside those cinder block walls, but from something deeper, the kind of cold that seeps in when the world stops seeing you. She was placed in cell B12, no window, one light bulb that flickered when it rained. The toilet was stainless steel, the kind that made you see yourself, but never clearly. She sat on the cot, hands folded, no tears, no movement, just silence. A silence so heavy, even the other detainees stopped whispering when they passed her door. Then, on the third day, she found something, tucked into the crease of the mattress, wrapped in a grocery bag, a Bible, torn, worn, its cover soft from too many fingers. It wasn't in Spanish, not fully. Some pages were underlined in blue pen, some were ripped out altogether. But inside, between the Book of Psalms and the yellowed spine, was something else. A photo, a child, black and white, faded, the edges curled like it had been held during storms. She stared at it. The boy in the picture couldn't be more than 6, eyes wide, mouth shut. There was something familiar about the expression, that same stillness, that same ache of being invisible. She flipped the photo. On the back, in block letters, "He was taken." I was silent. No name, no date. Just a confession pressed into old paper. She folded it slowly and slid it back inside the Bible. And for the first time since the judge called her a threat, she whispered something into the dark. "Señor, si me overs, manda uma saída." Lord, if you hear me, send a way out. And the Bible, that thin, trembling thing, slipped from her hands and fell open to a page marked with 3 lines. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul." She stared at those words like they were a map, like maybe God was still watching, just slowly. But as she read them again, she heard something outside the door. A key. Voices. Not the guards, not the other women. Someone else. And then the door opened, and standing in the shadow was someone she thought she'd never see again. Michelle didn't know how she got inside. Not really. The badge wasn't real, just laminated cardboard from a training session 6 months ago. But nobody looked too close when you walked fast and carried a clipboard. She kept her eyes forward, her voice steady, the same way she had learned to move in rooms where truth was inconvenient. The guards didn't stop her. They were too busy with their coffee and their indifference. She reached cell B12 and paused. Her heart was loud, too loud. But inside, she saw her, the girl, sitting on the cot like a statue carved out of suffering. Michelle knocked once. No answer. She opened the door anyway. They stared at each other, 2 women, one drowning in shame, the other holding it all in her lungs. Michelle stepped inside, closed the door. "I don't know your name," she said softly, her voice shaking. The girl didn't respond, so Michelle tried again. "Your son, Aaron, he's alive. He's safe. He's in foster care, but—" She paused. "He doesn't cry much. They said that at the shelter. He just listens, like he's waiting." The girl blinked. Something shifted. Michelle walked closer, pulled out the note, the original. "I found this," she said. "He still smells like you. That shirt you wrapped him in. It still carries your breath." The girl reached out slowly, fingers trembling, took the paper like it was made of glass, held it, pressed it to her lips. Then, in a voice so quiet Michelle barely heard, "Por favor, no lo olvides. Please, don't forget him." Michelle shook her head. "I won't." She looked at the Bible on the floor, picked it up, opened it to the same page. "He restoreth my soul," she read, and then she did something they didn't train her for. She knelt, not to pray, not to beg, but to say, "I was wrong." They stayed like that, 2 women, one kneeling, one breaking, until Michelle stood. "I'm going to do something," she said, "but it'll take courage." The girl just looked at her and then, just once, nodded. Michelle walked out, and as the door clicked shut, a guard stepped out of the shadows, arms crossed, eyes full of warning. "She's just another one," he said. "Let it go." But Michelle didn't answer, because in her pocket was a USB drive, and on it was a secret recording that could bring a courtroom to its knees. The drive was small, black, unlabeled, looked like nothing at all, but inside it was something dangerous. Not a weapon, not a threat, just the truth. And in this country, that's enough to get you burned. Michelle had made the recording on accident, or maybe not. Maybe the spirit moves in ways we don't always understand. She'd left her phone in her jacket pocket during that first court hearing, the one where Judge Peterson spoke with venom under a polished tongue. And the mic caught everything, every pause, every insult, every word dipped in disdain. "You people abandon your responsibilities, always with some sob story at the border. You're not refugees. You're cowards hiding behind your babies." That's what the judge said, clear as Sunday morning bells. Michelle had listened to it over and over, hands shaking. She heard the way the girl never replied, the way the room swallowed her silence and spit it back as guilt. And something inside Michelle snapped. Not like glass, not like wood, more like a chain rusted from years of compromise. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Not the judge, not the system, not the baby left behind because this country builds walls even between mother and child. She opened her laptop, wrote a letter to her supervisor, to the media, to whoever still believed that truth mattered. Then she hesitated. Her job, her license, her name, all at risk. But in the quiet, she thought of the girl's voice. "Por favor, no lo olvides." So she hit send. And just like that, the wheels began to turn. Whispers became emails. Emails became questions. And questions became something that sounded an awful lot like justice waking up from a long, bitter sleep. But the system don't go down easy. Because before the letter reached the desk, where it could have saved a life, someone intercepted it, deleted it, erased the record, buried it beneath layers of bureaucracy and dust. Michelle only found out when her access badge stopped working, her login credentials revoked, her desk emptied overnight, and on her voicemail, a single sentence from a blocked number. You should have kept your mouth shut. But truth don't stay buried for long. Especially not when it's wrapped in the voice of a crying judge and the silence of a mother who refused to scream. Michelle still had a copy, still had the drive, and somewhere in the dark, someone else did too. Because that recording wasn't the only thing the courtroom microphones captured. Someone else was wearing a wire, and they had just sent a copy to the judge herself. Judge Peterson didn't cry, not the way most folks cry, not with tears, not with noise. She broke in silence. It happened the morning after she received the envelope. No return address, no signature, just a flash drive and a yellow sticky note with 2 words. Listen closely. She played it on her laptop in the privacy of her office. The voice on the recording was hers, undeniably cold, sharp, laced with something ugly she hadn't meant to say out loud. You're a threat to America. Your kind never takes responsibility. You people are always running. She pressed pause, rewound, listened again. This time she heard something she hadn't before. A breath, not hers. The girl's, shaky, shallow, like someone trying to stay alive in a room meant to kill your spirit. And beneath it all, in the background, was a child's voice, soft, muffled, singing, a lullaby in Spanish, recorded from someone's pocket in that courtroom where no baby should have been. But there it was, a reminder of the child, of the note, of the prayer whispered between cell bars and broken pews. Peterson stood slowly, walked to the mirror in her office. She looked at herself, but she didn't see a judge. She saw her mother, back in Alabama, a woman who used to whisper curses when the neighbors got too loud, who called the maids the help, who said they breed like rabbits. Peterson had promised never to become that. But now, her reflection was too familiar. She tried to justify it. She broke the law. She left her baby. She had no documents. But the voice on the recording sounded less like a judge and more like a villain in someone else's story. She opened her desk drawer, pulled out the girl's case file, flipped through the pages, past the charges, past the intake notes, past the phrase, flight risk, until she reached a page stained with water, torn at the edge. The note, Mi hijo se llama Aaron. Por favor, cuídenlo. No tengo elección, pero Dios sí. Her fingers trembled. She stood there for a long time, staring at that line. Pero Dios sí. But God does. The phone rang. She didn't answer. Instead, she opened her calendar, scrolled to the next hearing. The girl's name was there. No last name, just a number, just a label. But Peterson clicked it and whispered to the screen, Maybe I was wrong. Then, without warning, she walked out of her chambers, folder in hand. And in the hallway, her assistant looked up, startled. Where are you going, Judge? But Peterson didn't stop walking, because she was on her way to reopen a case she never thought she'd question. And in the lobby, Michelle was waiting, with someone Peterson hadn't seen in 6 years. No one expects a 6-year-old to change the course of a courtroom. But then again, this child was born in silence, raised in waiting, wrapped in a shirt that smelled like his mother's goodbye. Aaron, that's what they named him, because that's what she whispered. And even though no one said it out loud, the boy carried it differently. He didn't speak much, didn't cry, just listened, like he was always hearing something the rest of the world missed. Michelle found him again after being locked out of her system. Took weeks, too many calls, too many closed doors. But she got to him. The foster home was plain, a trailer with chipped paint and Christmas lights that never came down. He was sitting on the floor with crayons and a box of broken action figures. Didn't look up when she walked in, didn't flinch when she said his name. But when she showed him the note, his note, something happened. He blinked, reached out, took it from her hands like it was the missing half of his breath. Michelle sat on the floor beside him. I need your help, she said. I know you're little, and the world's been too loud for you, but your mama's still waiting, and she doesn't even know you remember. The boy looked at her. Then, slowly, he reached under the couch, pulled out a piece of paper, folded soft at the edges. Michelle opened it. Inside, a drawing, stick figures, a tall one, a small one, holding hands in front of a church. Next to it, a sentence, barely spelled, but powerful. She didn't leave me, she loved me. Michelle felt the lump in her throat rise, because children don't lie like adults do. They speak in raw, broken truth. That paper wasn't just a drawing, it was a testimony. And if they wouldn't listen to his mother's silence, they might just listen to his crayon voice. The next morning, Michelle brought him to the courthouse. No fanfare, no press, just a backpack, the picture, and the kind of courage that doesn't know its own size. They waited in the lobby, Michelle in her worn-out flats, Aaron in a shirt 2 sizes too big. And then the elevator opened. Judge Peterson stepped out. She saw the boy first, and for a split second, her knees nearly gave out, because the face, the eyes, were the same ones she'd seen in her dreams since the recording played. The boy stood up, held out the letter, didn't say a word, just looked at her, and something shifted, not in the room, not in the court, but in the soul of a woman who'd forgotten what justice sounded like, because when she read the words, she dropped the folder and whispered a name she wasn't supposed to know. There are things the law forgets, stories that get erased because they're too inconvenient for the record, but memory has a strange way of rising, like smoke from a fire you thought was done burning. Judge Peterson stood frozen, the drawing in her hand. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Just a name, one name. Maria. Michelle's eyes widened. "How do you know her name?" she asked. But the judge didn't answer. She walked to the hallway window, stared at the parking lot, at the heat rising off the asphalt like ghost breath. And the memory came back. 6 years ago, before she sat behind the bench, before the robe, before the coldness became her armor. She'd been assigned to a temporary immigration unit, processing backlogs, late nights, fast decisions. She remembered the file. A girl, no shoes, pregnant, picked up near the Texas border. She wasn't supposed to be memorable, but something had stayed. Her eyes, those eyes that never begged, that only asked one thing. Is there another way? Back then Peterson had denied her asylum, said the girl didn't meet the criteria, said the risk wasn't imminent enough. She remembered signing the order. The girl had cried after, just once, not loud, but it stayed with her, because when she left the courtroom that night, her own daughter was waiting at home, wearing pajamas, asking why dinner was late. Peterson had tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and never thought of that girl again. Until now, because now the child was standing in front of her, alive, real, holding a letter that shattered her armor. She turned to Michelle. "I deported her once," the judge said, quiet, ashamed. But somehow she came back, not through papers, not through courts, through that boy. She dropped to one knee, looked Aaron in the eye. "You remember her?" The boy nodded. "Every night," he whispered. "Her voice sings in my head." Peterson stood, and in that moment, she didn't see a judge. She saw a gatekeeper, and she had kept out the wrong soul. She looked at Michelle. "We reopen her case. Tonight, before they move her again." Michelle blinked. "Move her?" Peterson nodded grim. "She's been marked for transfer, undisclosed location." "But we have evidence now," Michelle pleaded. "We have this boy, the note, the recording." The judge didn't flinch. "This system doesn't care unless we make it care." She turned toward the elevator. "Bring the boy. Bring the note. We're not asking permission anymore." But just as they reached the courtroom doors, a federal agent stepped in their path, holding an order signed in someone else's name. The agent was tall, clean suit, polished badge, and a voice like stone. He stood in front of the courtroom door, blocking the path like he'd been sent by something older than the law and colder than mercy. "Transfer order," he said, waving the paper without emotion. "Effective immediately. Subject being relocated to South Texas Processing Unit." Michelle stepped forward. You can't. She's got a pending hearing, new evidence, child testimony, judicial review. The agent didn't blink. Order overrides local jurisdiction. Federal clearance, no exceptions. Peterson narrowed her eyes, took the paper from his hand, read every line. Stamped, signed, time marked less than 2 hours ago, signed by a different judge. One who hadn't seen the child, one who hadn't heard the recording, one who hadn't tasted the silence of a mother who'd been called a threat when all she ever did was love quietly. "This is garbage," Peterson muttered. "Cowardice in legal format." The agent shrugged. "Not my call." And then he pulled out a photo, a still image, grainy, from a security cam, of Maria being led down a hallway, wrists shackled, eyes forward, no expression. She was already in transit. Somewhere. "Where is she now?" Michelle asked, panic rising. The agent didn't answer. Aaron stepped closer, stared at the photo, touched the screen. Then, in the smallest voice, he whispered, "That's her." Peterson turned. Something hardened behind her eyes. A memory, a vow, a line drawn in courtroom dust. She grabbed her robe, pulled it over her shoulders like a soldier puts on armor. "Get me the clerk, get me the marshal, get me a goddamn room." The agent shook his head. "This isn't how it works." But Peterson didn't answer. She walked past him, not fast, not loud, but with the gravity of a woman who finally chose to do what was right, not what was allowed. They opened courtroom 3. No press, no jury, just Peterson, Michelle, Aaron, and an old courtroom recorder blinking red. The judge looked at the boy. "State your name," she said softly. "Aaron," he replied. She looked at Michelle. "Submit the evidence." The note, the drawing, the voice clip, the testimony, each one placed on the desk like sacred offerings. And as they began to speak, Peterson whispered something to herself. "Even if they erase this, I'll speak it loud enough for heaven to remember." But across town, in the back of a transport van, Maria looked out the window and saw something that made her blood freeze. A gas station, with no sign and no road, just a turnoff into nowhere. The van slowed. Dust kicked up behind the tires, dancing in the red glow of sunset. No signs, no border checkpoint. Just a dirt road that curled like a snake into brush and silence. Maria sat in the back, hands cuffed, mouth dry, eyes searching for something that looked like reason. But there was none. The other women in the van said nothing. Some slept, some stared out the windows like the world had already given up on them. A guard sat near the door, big, unmoving, headphones in, mouth chewing something he didn't taste. Maria turned to the window. They passed a rusted fence, a broken light, then nothing. Nothing but brush, sky, and the sound of a van carrying lives as if they were trash. She pressed her forehead to the glass, thought of Aaron, his weight in her arms, the heat of his breath on her neck, the way he hadn't cried that night, only watched her, as if he knew she wasn't leaving him, only returning him to a God who hadn't answered fast enough. She closed her eyes and prayed again, but the prayer was different this time. Not desperate, not begging. Just one line, "Let him know I never stopped singing." The van stopped, doors opened. They were led out one by one, into the night, into a facility with no name, barbed wire, floodlights, and men with badges that didn't match any department she knew. No one spoke. They led her into a room, bare, one chair, one table, no clock, and then a woman entered, not a guard, not in uniform. She sat down, crossed her legs, and opened a file. "Maria Delgado," she said. No emotion, no warmth, just the name. "You've been flagged as non-cooperative, unfit for standard deportation." Maria said nothing. The woman tilted her head. "You have a child in the system. We know about the note, the church, the hearing." Still, Maria didn't speak, because she knew everything she said now could be twisted, bent, used to disappear her for good. The woman leaned forward. "But you have a choice," she said. "We can erase it all. The boy stays. You go. No more hearings. No more files." Maria stared at her, eyes sharp, voice quiet. "Erase what?" The woman smiled. "Your story." Silence. Then Maria did something unexpected. She stood and said one word, a word that would echo through every wall, a word that wasn't English, but carried the weight of truth. "No." And far away, in courtroom 3, the speaker crackled as her voice broke through on a live transmission no one authorized. They locked her behind steel and silence, thinking that would end the story, thinking that if no one heard her and no one would remember her. But the world don't work like that, because truth, real truth, don't need permission to breathe. It finds cracks in the walls, crawls through circuits, whispers in wires, and rises like incense where they least expect. The microphone in courtroom 3 crackled, and then her voice came through, tired, soft but unbroken. "Yo no soy amenaza, yo soy madre. I am not a threat. I am a mother." The room fell silent. The bailiff dropped his pen. Michelle gasped. Aaron reached for her hand, and Judge Peterson, the same woman who once called her a danger, stood, not because she had to, because she'd heard something sacred. Maria kept speaking. No anger, no vengeance, just memory of how she crossed barefoot, how she labored alone, how she wrapped her child in borrowed fabric and placed him gently at the foot of the cross. "I didn't abandon him," she said. "I entrusted him. I chose life over death, love over noise, silence over survival." And then she sang a lullaby, the same one she hummed when he was born. And across that courtroom, through static and glass and miles of red tape, Aaron began to hum along, the same melody, the same pitch, as if the cord that once connected them had never really been cut. Peterson lifted her gavel, but not to silence her, to clear her, motion to reopen, motion to dismiss, motion to restore full custody, one by one, like psalms on a Sunday morning. The courtroom became a sanctuary, and somewhere in the dust of that unnamed detention site, a guard heard the voice from the speaker and paused, because even chains grow heavy when a soul starts to sing. Days passed, and then it happened. A white van pulled into the same church parking lot where it all began. She stepped out slowly, clothes loose, eyes tired, but her arms were open, and on the church steps, waiting, was a little boy in a blue sweater. No guards, no lawyers, no threats. Just a reunion written not in ink, but in blood, prayer, and ash. He ran to her. She knelt. They didn't speak, just held each other the way heaven holds storms until they pass. And when she lifted him in her arms, the world didn't shift, but something small healed, something sacred, because they tried to call her a criminal, an invader, a number. But her story survived, in paper, in prayer, in song. They locked her up thinking it would silence her, but her story found a way to fly. Across courtrooms, across wires, across hearts like yours, through the skies of this country, skies made of paper, but stronger than steel. Pastor Elijah, vos suave, intima, fermi. If this story touched something deep inside you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, because some truths aren't shouted, they're whispered, until the whole world starts to listen. Amen.